December
the
23rd,
detonator?
Fort
You're not leaving
Evergreen,
here until you tell
Alaska.
me.
4:47
I'm not
p.m.
telling you
The
anything.
temperature had dropped to 18 degrees below zero. Snow fell in thick curtains across the training ground, each flake stinging like needles against exposed skin. Captain Mira Thorne stood at the edge of the combat circle, her breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall, 120 pounds, and at this moment, she was surrounded. Staff Sergeant Cole Maddox circled her slowly, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. Behind him, Sergeant Riley Beck and Specialist Hunter Collins spread out to complete the triangle. The three men were each over 6 feet, their combined weight exceeding 700 pounds. They wore grins that suggested this was going to be easy. "Christmas is coming, Captain," Cole said, his voice carrying across the frozen field. "Who's afraid of a little girl who barely reaches my shoulder?" Laughter rippled through the assembled soldiers. Nearly 40 personnel had gathered around the perimeter, drawn by rumors that had spread through the barracks like wildfire. Word was that Captain Thorne had been fast-tracked into the Advanced Combatives Instructor Program through some kind of quota system, that she didn't belong here, that she was a diversity hire who would crumble under real pressure. Mira said nothing. Her stance was relaxed, weight distributed evenly, hands loose at her sides. She touched her left wrist briefly, fingers tracing the outline of a small tattoo barely visible beneath her sleeve, a hawk with wings spread wide. It was a symbol no one here would recognize, a mark from a program that had been erased from official records. Cole took the first step forward. His right fist came up in a wide haymaker, confident and careless. Mira shifted her weight backward half an inch, just enough. The punch whistled past her cheek, close enough that she felt the displacement of air. Before Cole could recover, she stepped inside his guard, drove her shoulder into his chest, and used his own forward momentum to send him sprawling onto the packed snow. The circle went silent. Beck charged in from the left. Mira dropped low, swept his lead leg, and watched him crash face first into the ground. She executed the technique with minimal effort, as if she were demonstrating basic mechanics to a class. No wasted motion, no excess force, just perfect application of leverage and timing. Collins hesitated. His face had gone pale, uncertainty replacing his earlier confidence. But he was committed now, trapped by the expectations of his peers. He came in fast, attempting a tackle. Mira sidestepped, caught his wrist, applied a standing arm lock that brought him to his knees. She held him there for 3 seconds, just long enough to make her point, then released him. The snow continued to fall. Somewhere in the distance, chapel bells marked the approaching holiday. Mira stood in the center of the circle, unmarked, her breathing steady and controlled. Around her, 3 men struggled to their feet, their pride bleeding into the frozen ground. December 18th. 5 days earlier, Fort Evergreen sat in a valley, surrounded by mountains that looked like broken teeth against the winter sky. The base was operating on skeleton crew for the holidays. Most personnel had gone home to families, leaving behind only those who had nowhere else to be and those whose duties couldn't be postponed. Mira's assignment orders had come through 48 hours before Christmas leave began. Lead instructor for the year-end Advanced Combative Certification course. It was a high-visibility position, one that typically required years of experience and multiple combat deployments. The fact that she'd been given the role at 29 years old had raised eyebrows throughout the chain of command. Command Sergeant Major Alden Frost watched from his office window as Mira crossed the parade ground, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He was a career soldier with 32 years of service, a man who had learned to read people by watching how they carried themselves. Something about Captain Thorne's bearing caught his attention. She moved with the kind of economy that came from hard training, her steps measured and deliberate despite the ice underfoot. The rumors had started within hours of her arrival. She was too young, too small, too inexperienced. Her personnel file showed a standard infantry background followed by an 18-month gap labeled simply as Special Assignment. No details, no explanation. Just a hole in her service record that raised more questions than it answered. Mira checked into temporary quarters in Building 7, a converted barracks that housed transient personnel. Her room was 12 by 15 feet, furnished with a metal frame bed, a desk, and a locker. Someone had left a small artificial Christmas tree on the desk, its cheap plastic branches already drooping. She set it aside without ceremony and began unpacking her gear. She had no family to go home to. Her father had died 3 years ago during a training accident that wasn't really an accident. The official report said equipment failure. But Mira knew better. Ethan Thorne had been demonstrating advanced mountain rescue techniques when his rope anchor failed. He had checked that anchor twice. Her father never made mistakes. Christmas at Fort Evergreen meant staying busy, staying focused, not thinking about empty places at dinner tables or phone calls that would never come. That evening, she attended the mandatory instructor briefing. 15 combat veterans sat around a conference table, most of them looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to open skepticism. Cole Maddox sat at the far end, arms crossed, his jaw set in what would become a familiar expression of disapproval. Captain Thorne will be leading Module 4, the senior instructor announced. Advanced close quarters combat and threat neutralization. Cole's hand went up. Sir, with respect, Module 4 requires Level 3 certification. Captain Thorne's file doesn't show. Captain Thorne's certifications are current and appropriate. The instructor cut him off. The tone was final, brooking no argument. But the seed had been planted. After the briefing, small groups formed in the hallway, voices low and conspiratorial. Mira walked past them without acknowledgement, her face betraying nothing. December 19th, Training Day 1. The first class went smoothly. Mira demonstrated defensive techniques with mechanical precision, breaking down each movement into its component parts. Her teaching style was methodical and clear, leaving no room for confusion. Several students nodded with understanding, taking notes as she worked through increasingly complex scenarios. Cole Maddox watched from the back of the group, his expression darkening with each passing minute. He had held the lead instructor position for Module 4 for the past 2 years. It was his territory, his domain of expertise. Seeing this outsider take his place felt like a personal insult, a suggestion that he was somehow inadequate. During the afternoon session, Mira introduced an advanced wrist control technique she'd learned during her classified training. It was elegant and effective, requiring minimal strength to achieve maximum control. She demonstrated it slowly, explaining the anatomical principles that made it work. "That's not in the manual," Cole said loudly. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward him. "We teach standard Army combatives techniques here, not whatever creative interpretation you picked up somewhere." Mira met his gaze calmly. "This technique is more effective than the standard approach. Would you like me to demonstrate on you, Sergeant?" The challenge hung in the air. Cole stepped forward, confident in his size advantage. Mira guided him through the setup, explaining each step clearly. Then, with gentle pressure, she applied the lock. Cole's face went from confident to shocked to pained in the space of 3 seconds. He tapped out immediately. "The manual," Mira said quietly as she released him, "covers fundamentals. This is what comes after fundamentals." That evening, Cole sat in the NCO lounge with Beck and Collins, nursing a beer and a bruised ego. His wrist still ached where Mira had applied pressure. "She's making us look like amateurs," Beck said, "teaching techniques that aren't approved, showing off in front of the students." "Someone needs to put her in her place," Collins added, though his voice carried less conviction than his words. Cole stared at his beer, his mind working through possibilities. The year-end demonstration. The 3-on-1 scenario. What if we volunteer to be her opponents? Beck grinned. "She'll have to decline, admit she can't handle it. Or she'll accept," Cole said slowly, "and we'll show everyone what happens when policy decisions override combat readiness." The next morning, Cole submitted a formal request to the training coordinator. Command Sergeant Major Frost reviewed it with narrowed eyes, recognizing the political trap it represented. If he denied it, he would appear to be protecting Thorne from legitimate training evaluation. If he approved it, he would be sanctioning what amounted to a public hazing. He approved it. But he also made sure he would be present as safety officer. Whatever was about to happen, Alden Frost wanted to see it for himself. Colorado. 15 years earlier. Mira was 12 years old the first time Winter tried to kill her. She and her father had gone into the Rockies for what was supposed to be a routine overnight camping trip. Ethan Thorne believed in teaching through experience, in pushing his daughter beyond comfort zones until survival skills became instinct. He was a former SEAL Team 6 operator, though he never spoke about his service except in lessons. The storm came in faster than the forecast predicted. One moment, they were setting up camp under clear skies. The next, visibility dropped to 0 as wind-driven snow turned the world white. Temperature plummeted from 40 degrees to 15 in less than an hour. "Dad?" Mira's voice was small against the howling wind. "What do we do?" Ethan was already moving, his training overriding any hint of panic. "We dig. Find that rock outcrop we passed. Build a snow shelter." They worked together, father and daughter, excavating a cave in the accumulated drift. Mira's fingers went numb despite her gloves, but she kept digging. Her father had taught her that pain was information, not instruction. Acknowledge it, work through it, survive. The shelter took 2 hours to complete. By the time they crawled inside, Mira was shivering so hard she could barely hold the flashlight. Ethan wrapped her in his sleeping bag, then used his own body heat to warm her core temperature. He told her stories while they waited out the storm. Stories about staying calm when everything went wrong, about making decisions when fear tried to make them for you. On the second day, their water ran out. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Ethan was studying their map by flashlight when Mira noticed his hands shaking, not from cold, from pain. He'd injured his ankle during the shelter construction, a fact he'd hidden until now. "I can get help," Mira said. It wasn't a question. Ethan looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Southeast. Follow the drainage. Stay out of the wind. If you start to feel warm, that's hypothermia. Stop and build another shelter." Mira made the 3-mile trek in 5 hours. She maintained her pace despite exhaustion, stopped twice to orient herself using landmarks she could barely see, refused to give in to the creeping desire to just lie down and rest. When she finally stumbled into a ranger station, she delivered a precise location and situation report before allowing herself to collapse. The rescue team found Ethan exactly where she'd said he'd be, alive and hypothermic but stable. In the helicopter ride down, he squeezed her hand once and said, "You have something most people never develop. You can function when everything is falling apart." That night had become the foundation of everything that followed. The cold had taught her that survival wasn't about strength, it was about will. About making the next right decision when your body was screaming for you to stop. Syria. December 25th, 2019. The mission was supposed to be simple: humanitarian extraction. A medical team had been trapped by unexpected fighting in what was supposed to be a safe zone. First Lieutenant Mira Thorne's team had volunteered to go in during the temporary ceasefire that both sides had agreed to for the holiday. The ceasefire lasted until they were 3 blocks from the evacuation point. The explosion tore through the building to their left, sending a wall of concrete and rebar cascading across the street. Mira's team scattered, taking cover as small arms fire erupted from multiple positions. The ambush had been planned, the ceasefire a lie designed to draw them into a kill zone. "Harper!" Mira shouted into her radio. "Status!" Lieutenant Harper Lane had been 20 feet ahead when the wall came down. Now she was buried somewhere in the rubble, her radio transmitting only static and the sound of labored breathing. Mira made her decision in under 2 seconds. Rodriguez, suppressing fire. Chen, cover my advance, I'm going in. The next 3 minutes existed in a strange state outside normal time. Mira moved through the debris field like she was moving through water, each step deliberate and measured despite the bullets cracking past her head. She found Harper pinned under a support beam, conscious but fading. Blood pooled beneath her, dark and spreading. "Hey," Harper's voice was weak but steady. "Terrible timing, right? Christmas and everything." Mira worked to lift the beam, her muscles screaming with effort. It moved 3 inches. 4. Not enough. She repositioned, tried again, and felt something in her lower back tear. The pain was white-hot and immediate, but she kept lifting. "Listen," Harper said quietly. Her hand found Mira's wrist, gripping with surprising strength. "There are fights only you can win. Remember that. When they try to tell you that you can't, remember." The beam shifted. Mira dragged Harper free, applied pressure to the worst of the bleeding, called for immediate evacuation. Chen and Rodriguez provided covering fire while she carried Harper through the kill zone, moving with mechanical determination despite the weight and the pain and the knowledge that was growing with every step. They reached the extraction point. The medical team was already there, hands moving with practiced efficiency. But Mira could see it in their faces, in the way they worked faster and faster while the light left Harper's eyes. Harper died at 1,647 hours on Christmas Day. Her last words had been about fighting, about refusing to accept limitations imposed by others' expectations, about being the person who could do what needed doing when everyone else said it was impossible. Mira received a Bronze Star for her actions that day. She never wore it. The medal sat in a box somewhere, along with the citation and the formal letter of commendation. What she kept was Harper's words, carried forward like a promise that still needed keeping. Classified location: 14 months of training. The invitation came 6 months after Syria. A single encrypted email with coordinates and a date. No explanation, no context. Just an opportunity that couldn't be discussed with anyone, not even commanding officers. Mira arrived at a facility that officially didn't exist, located in terrain that wasn't marked on any map. The Harbinger program was an experimental unit designed to test whether female operators could be trained to SEAL standards and beyond. It was political, controversial, and operated under such strict secrecy that even its existence would be denied if questioned. 12 women began the program. 4 graduated. The training was methodical and brutal. Close quarters combat taken to levels that required rewiring basic human responses. Resistance to interrogation that pushed psychological limits until breaking meant learning to rebuild differently. Operations in extreme environments where failure meant actual death, not training failure. Mira excelled in winter warfare modules. The instructors watched with clinical interest as she moved through snow-covered terrain with the efficiency of someone who'd learned these lessons young. She could build shelter, navigate whiteouts, fight effectively in conditions that reduced most operators to survival mode. On graduation day, each survivor received a tattoo. A hawk with wings spread, positioned where it could be hidden beneath standard uniforms. The hawk represented their role. They were early warning systems, first responders, specialists deployed when conventional forces couldn't operate, harbingers of what was coming. Mira was given additional training in psychological operations and combat instruction. The plan was for Harbinger graduates to eventually train the next generation of special operators to normalize female presence in elite units by demonstrating undeniable competence. 3 months after graduation, everything changed. Congressional oversight committees got wind of the program. Questions were raised about funding, about legality, about whether this was appropriate use of military resources. The debate became partisan and toxic. Politicians who'd never seen combat used Harbinger as a talking point, a way to score points with constituents who had strong feelings about gender roles in the military. The program was terminated. All documentation was classified or destroyed. The 4 graduates were reassigned to conventional units with strict orders. Never discuss where they'd been. Never reveal what they could do. Become invisible again, but carry forward the training in whatever ways they could. Mira returned to regular service with an 18-month gap in her record and capabilities that exceeded anything her file suggested. She was an anomaly, a statistical outlier that made no sense on paper. People looked at her and saw a standard infantry officer who'd somehow been given advanced positions. They didn't see the 1,000 hours of specialized training, the operations that would never be acknowledged, the skills she'd earned through methods that officially never existed. The isolation was worse than the secrecy. She was surrounded by people but fundamentally alone, unable to share the most significant experience of her life. The other Harbinger graduates were scattered across different commands, faces she'd recognize but couldn't acknowledge. They were ghosts of a program that had existed just long enough to prove something before politics made it inconvenient. December 22nd, Fort Evergreen. The demonstration was scheduled for December 23rd at 1,600 hours. Cole's request had been approved through official channels, which meant backing out would require filing paperwork explaining why she couldn't handle a standard training scenario. It was a bureaucratic trap, and Mira recognized it immediately. She could have declined anyway, filed an equal opportunity complaint about hostile work environment, made this a formal problem that would take months to resolve, but that would mean letting Harper's words become empty. It would mean accepting that there were fights she couldn't win simply because people didn't want her to. That evening, Collins found Mira in the base gym. She was running wind sprints, her form precise even as exhaustion set in. He watched her for several minutes before approaching. "Captain," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Mira stopped, breathing hard but controlled. She waited. "Cole is planning to go hard tomorrow. not training hard. He wants to hurt you, make it look like an accident. Collins wouldn't meet her eyes. I went along with it because I believed what everyone was saying. That you didn't belong here. But watching you teach, seeing how you move, I think maybe we're the ones who don't understand what we're looking at. Thank you for telling me, Mira said. But I'm not canceling. I didn't think you would, Collins replied. For what it's worth, I'll pull my shots tomorrow, but Cole and Beck won't. That night, Mira sat in her quarters and called her father's number. The line had been disconnected years ago, but she dialed it anyway, let it ring into empty space. It was a ritual she developed, a way of feeling less alone on nights when the weight of everything became too much. Tomorrow I have to fight again, she said to the silence, not because I want to, because if I don't, it means everything Harper said was wrong. It means the program was pointless. It means I've been carrying this weight for nothing. The silence didn't answer. It never did. But somehow, speaking the words aloud made them easier to carry. Command Sergeant Major Frost was also preparing for tomorrow, though in different ways. He'd pulled Captain Thorne's full file, including the classified sections that required special clearance to access. What he found there raised questions he couldn't answer. Training certificates that shouldn't exist for someone of her rank, commendations from units that weren't supposed to have female personnel, references to programs with names that were redacted even in classified documents. Whoever Mira Thorne was, she wasn't what her surface record suggested. Tomorrow would reveal either a political disaster or something else entirely. Frost intended to be there to witness whichever it was. December 23rd, 1,558 hours. Snow fell in thick curtains across Fort Evergreen's main training ground. Portable lights had been set up around the combat circle, their yellow glow creating an island of visibility in the growing darkness. Nearly 60 personnel had gathered to watch, more than had attended any previous year-end demonstration. Mira arrived precisely at 1,600 hours. She wore standard training uniform, no protective gear beyond the minimum required. Her face was calm, almost serene, as she stepped into the circle. The hawk tattoo on her wrist was just visible beneath her rolled sleeve. Cole, Beck, and Collins entered from the opposite side. Cole and Beck were smiling. Collins looked uncomfortable, his jaw tight with tension. Command Sergeant Major Frost stood at the circle's edge, his whistle ready. This is a controlled demonstration of multiple opponent defensive tactics. Attackers will use full contact but controlled force. Safety protocols remain in effect. Any actual injury stops the exercise immediately. Are all participants clear? 4 voices answered in unison. Yes, Sergeant Major. Frost's whistle cut through the falling snow. Cole came in first, his confidence absolute. He was 6'2", 220 pounds, with 3 combat deployments and 7 years of combatives training. He threw a heavy right hand designed to end this quickly and establish dominance. Mira's response was so efficient it almost looked effortless. Weight shift backward, minimal movement, just enough to let the punch pass. As Cole's momentum carried him forward, she stepped inside his guard, drove her shoulder into his center mass, and used his own power to send him sprawling. The technique was textbook, executed with such precision that it looked choreographed. The crowd's reaction was audible. Surprised murmurs, a few nervous laughs. Cole hit the snow hard, the impact driving air from his lungs. Beck attacked while Cole was still down. He came from the left, attempting a wrestling takedown. Mira saw him in her peripheral vision, dropped her stance low, and executed a perfect leg sweep. Beck's head hit the packed snow with a sound that carried across the circle. He lay there for 3 seconds before pushing himself up, dazed. Collins approached more cautiously. He had height and reach advantages, but his earlier warning to Mira meant he was attacking with reluctance. He threw a jab to test her defense. Mira blocked it easily, then demonstrated a joint lock by catching his wrist mid-strike. She had him controlled in under a second, demonstrating the lock's mechanics to the watching crowd before releasing him. The fight should have ended there. 3 attempts, 3 failures. The point made. But Cole was on his feet again, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. Again, he growled. What followed was faster and more intense. Cole and Beck came at her together, coordinating their attacks with the kind of teamwork that comes from years of training together. High-low combination, forcing her to defend multiple angles simultaneously. Mira moved like water, flowing around their attacks rather than meeting them head-on. She redirected Cole's energy past her, used his bulk as a shield against Beck's advance. When they tried to flank her, she positioned herself so they interfered with each other's approach angles. Every movement was economical, every defensive technique converting their aggression into vulnerability. Command Sergeant Major Frost watched with growing recognition. He'd seen movement patterns like this before, but only from Tier 1 operators who'd spent years in continuous training. The way she controlled space, the precise timing of her defensive responses, the absolute absence of wasted motion. This wasn't talent. This was engineered capability built through hundreds of training hours. Cole tried one final time. He came in from behind, attempting a rear chokehold, putting his full weight into the attack. It was a violation of the demonstration rules, a genuine attempt to harm, disguised as training. Mira sensed it coming, rotated inside his grip, executed a hip throw that sent 220 pounds of muscle flying through the air. Cole landed hard, the impact stunning him motionless. Frost's whistle pierced the air. Exercise terminated. All personnel stand down. The training ground fell silent. Snow continued to fall, coating everything in white. Mira stood in the center of the circle, breathing deeply but steadily, unmarked and unbowed. Around her, 3 men struggled to their feet, their pride and preconceptions lying shattered in the snow. December 23rd, 1,830 hours. Frost's office was warm against the bitter cold outside. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, studying Captain Thorne with new understanding. She sat across from him, her posture relaxed but attentive. "I recognize some of those techniques," Frost said carefully. "I served with SEAL Team 3 for 4 years. Saw similar movement patterns from operators who'd been through advanced training that most people don't know exists." Mira said nothing. "I also accessed your classified file, the sections I needed clearance to read. There's an 18-month gap that's labeled Special Assignment with no details." He paused. "Programs that train personnel to that level don't just happen by accident. They require massive resources, political will, and usually, they leave traces." "I can't discuss the specifics of where I've been or what I've trained for," Mira said quietly. "Not because I don't trust you, because I was ordered not to." Frost nodded slowly. "I understand operational security. But I need to know one thing. Are you a danger to my personnel? Do you have capabilities that make this assignment inappropriate?" "No," Mira said immediately. "My training exceeds standard combatives instruction, yes, but that makes me more qualified, not less. I can teach these soldiers how to survive situations they'll face in real combat, how to stay alive when everything goes wrong. And today's demonstration? I held back," Mira said flatly. "Everything I did today was defensive and controlled. I could have injured all 3 of them permanently within the first 30 seconds. I chose not to." The statement hung between them. It wasn't a boast. It was a simple statement of fact delivered with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. Frost leaned back in his chair. "Staff Sergeant Maddox will be formally counseled for his conduct today. The attempted rear choke was beyond demonstration parameters and showed clear intent to harm. He'll be removed from instructor duties pending review." "He was afraid," Mira said, "of what I represent, of what it means if someone like me can do what I did today. That doesn't excuse his actions." "No," Mira agreed. "But understanding his fear might help him move past it. That's what leadership is sometimes, helping people see past their own limitations." Later that evening, Collins found Mira in the same barracks hallway where they'd first spoken. His right shoulder was bandaged where he'd hit the ground during the demonstration. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for being part of this, for doubting you, for letting ego and prejudice convince me that you didn't belong here." Mira studied him for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes, ma'am." "If I'd been a man with the same training and the same capabilities, would there have been a demonstration today?" Collins was quiet for several seconds. "No," he finally said. "No, there wouldn't have been." "That's what needs to change," Mira said. "Not my credentials or my capability. The assumption that those things are less valid because of my gender. That's the real fight. Today was just a symptom." Collins nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I see it now. And I'll do better." "That's all I ask," Mira replied. "We're all on the same side, fighting the same battles, We can't afford to waste energy fighting each other. December 24th, 2,245 hours. The base chapel bells rang out across Fort Evergreen, marking Christmas Eve. Mira stood alone on the training ground where yesterday's demonstration had taken place. Fresh snow had covered all evidence of the confrontation, leaving only pristine white beneath the scattered lights. She carried a small wooden box, its corners worn smooth from years of handling. Inside was a collection of memories. Her father's seal trident, removed from his uniform after his death. A photo of Harper Lane, smiling in better times. The official certificate from the Harbinger program, stamped with classifications that would never be declassified. Mira set the box in the snow and knelt beside it, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. This had become her ritual. On significant nights, she brought out these pieces of her past and acknowledged them. Remembered the people who had shaped her journey, even if that journey couldn't be fully shared. "I held the line today," she said quietly. "Like you taught me, Dad. Like you told me to, Harper. I didn't break. I didn't back down. I showed them what's possible." Footsteps crunched in the snow behind her. Command Sergeant Major Frost approached, his own breath visible in the cold. He stopped a respectful distance away, waiting to be acknowledged. "Sergeant Major," Mira said, without turning. "Captain, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all." She gestured to the space beside her. "Just paying respects to people who aren't here anymore." Frost moved closer, his eyes catching on the seal trident in the box. "Your father was one of us." "He was. He trained me from the time I could walk. Not because he wanted me to follow his path exactly, but because he wanted me to be capable of following any path I chose. He believed that strength came from preparation, and preparation meant doing the work when everyone else was resting." "He taught you well," Frost said. "What you demonstrated yesterday wasn't just skill. It was discipline, restraint, the ability to dominate without destroying. Those are lessons that most operators never fully learn." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching snow fall through the light beams. "Fort Evergreen needs people like you," Frost said finally. "Not just as instructors, as examples of what's possible when capability matters more than appearance. When competence outweighs prejudice." "I appreciate that, Sergeant Major. But I'm not here to be an example. I'm here to do a job and do it well. Whether you want to be or not, you are one. Every time you step onto that training ground, you're showing these soldiers that excellence doesn't fit their preconceptions. That the best warrior isn't always the biggest or the strongest or the one who looks the part." He paused. "That matters, more than you might realize." Mira closed the wooden box carefully, her fingers tracing its worn edges. "My father used to say that the hardest battles are the ones you fight without anyone watching. The moments when you could take the easy path, compromise your standards, let circumstances define your choices." He said those were the fights that mattered most, because they determined who you actually were when no one was keeping score. Wise man. He was. And he was right. Yesterday wasn't about proving anything to Maddox or Beck or Collins. It was about proving something to myself, that I could face their doubt, their hostility, their attempt to diminish me, and remain exactly who I've trained to be. That's the real victory. The chapel bells rang again, marking midnight. Christmas Day had arrived. Frost stood, brushing snow from his uniform. "Merry Christmas, Captain Thorne. I'm glad you're here. Fort Evergreen is better for your presence." "Merry Christmas, Sergeant Major." After Frost left, Mira remained in the snow for another hour. She thought about Harper's last words, about her father's lessons, about the 3 other Harbinger graduates scattered across the military, doing similar work in similar isolation. They were building something slowly, one demonstration at a time, one student at a time, proving that capability transcended gender, that excellence spoke for itself regardless of the package it came in. The work wasn't finished, it might never be finished, but progress was being made, measured in moments like yesterday, when doubt met reality and reality won. Mira stood finally, the wooden box tucked securely under her arm. She walked back toward her quarters through the falling snow, her shadow stretching long and dark across the white ground. Tomorrow she would teach another class, demonstrate more techniques, help soldiers become better versions of themselves. The cycle would continue, season after season, year after year, until the day when demonstrations like yesterday's weren't necessary anymore. When a woman could walk into an advanced combat training course and be judged solely on what she could do, not what people assumed she couldn't, that day wasn't today. But it was closer than it had been yesterday. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, word of the demonstration spread beyond Fort Evergreen, not through official channels, but through the informal networks that connect military bases worldwide. Stories got embellished in the retelling, details changed, but the core message remained consistent. A female captain had decisively defeated 3 larger male opponents using techniques that suggested training beyond anything standard. Cole Maddox was reassigned to administrative duties pending a formal review of his conduct. Beck received written counseling. Collins requested to remain in Mira's training program, citing his desire to learn from someone who clearly understood combat at a level he'd never encountered. Mira continued teaching. Her classes filled immediately, with waiting lists forming for future sessions. Soldiers who'd witnessed the demonstration wanted to learn those techniques, to understand how someone half their size had made domination look effortless. She taught them the mechanics, the physics of leverage and timing, but she also taught them the deeper lessons, that strength comes in forms they hadn't been trained to recognize, that their assumptions about capability might be limiting their own potential, that excellence demands constant challenging of comfortable beliefs. Somewhere in the classified files of military intelligence, a notation was made in Captain Mira Thorne's record. A simple line added by someone who understood what they'd witnessed. Harbinger training confirmed effective. Subject demonstrates full capability retention in hostile environment. Recommend continued observation and potential expansion of similar programs when political climate allows. The program that had officially never existed was being remembered. Its lessons were being preserved. And somewhere, 3 other women with hawk tattoos on their wrists were doing similar work, fighting similar battles, proving similar points. The war wasn't over. But battles were being won. On New Year's Eve, Mira received an encrypted message through channels that officially didn't exist. Just 3 words. "Well done, Harbinger." She smiled, typed a brief acknowledgement, and deleted both messages. The work continued. The mission remained clear. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she wasn't quite so alone after all. Remember, I'm a SEAL combat master.